Today, we're taking a look at Jam from Acustica Audio. Jam is 14 hardware units with 25 sets of saturation. Its main feature is its dynamic saturation and preamp color. Let's take a look at the controls. On the left, we have the usual input. On the right, the output. At the top here, we have a plus 18 and a minus 18 to boost your signal for even more saturation. We have the various saturation families here. So it's 14 units, hardware units that were sampled, and it's split up amongst these 25 saturation families. Under that, we have the mix type, and we'll get to that because that's a very important thing that I think some people may not know does something special. We have up to 16x in high quality mode, oversampling, and up to 64x in eco mode. These are the gain reduction plus and the gain reduction minus meters. This knob here controls how much saturation you're asking of the plugin. We have 4 listen modes: the normal, left and right, the mid, the side, and the delta, which is the difference between the plugin's input signal and what the plugin is doing. We can switch to side and mid here, or keep it in the middle for left and right, and that is what the plugin is processing on. Here we have the shape, which you can dial in just how hard the saturation is. Dry and wet mix knob, and we'll come back to that because this works with this. That's the top section. The bottom section, we have the preamp. Now, a lot of people were talking about the difference between Jam and Pumpkin Pro. This is where that difference comes in. This preamp section here is the color of the hardware that is sampled. And let me note, each one of these 14 units here, when you select a unit, it will change the preamp color to the unit selected. We have a high pass, low pass, low shelf, high shelf. This is how you select the frequencies. This is how you select the gain. This is the preamp color. You can push more into that. There is a distortion point. Depending on the preamp that you select, it changes. This button here, insert, works with this, which works with that. Stick around. We'll talk about it. And of course, at the top, the preset management system in the newer Acustica Audio plugins. And then finally, we do have presets that come with the plugin, with quite a number of them available. All right. Some of these are pretty damn awesome. We'll talk about this one here. I think this may become a part of my vocal chain permanently. But that's the controls. Let's take a listen at what we did with Jam. What we have is the same record from Pumpkin Pro. This time I have it running in Reaper because of its plugin handling capability. I did put Mystic and Salt and Opal in places where I need it, but we have Jam pretty much on everything with the exception of the overheads. Right now we're at 3.8%, and all of the Jam plugins are bypassed. So if we engage, we're at about 10%. Here's the kick before, after. Here's the hat before, after. Here's the snare before, after. The clap before, after. Here's the percussion before, after. Here's the bass before, after. Here's the lead before.
She walked right out my life.
After.
She walked right out my life.
Here's the backgrounds before.
She walked right out my life.
And after.
She walked right out my life.
This is the drum bus before. And after. All right, and then for the master bus, we'll do a complete before and after. Before.
She walked right out my life. Cut me down with a bloody knife.
And after.
She walked right out my life. Cut me down with a bloody knife. Ran away with my soul. Played me like a tune on the radio. She walked right out my life. Cut me down with a bloody knife. Ran away with my soul. Played me like a tune on the radio.
As you can see, there is a strong color with this one, especially when you drive saturation. All right, I want to talk about this mix type because I think I have a grasp of what it's doing. I think. All right, so if I could explain it in the way I'm thinking here, this only activates when you modify the dry wet mix knob. It doesn't do anything for the full-on wet signal. Let's demonstrate the filtering here, because I think this will kind of help understand some of what's going on. This insert button puts the preamp and filter section before the saturation. When it's not engaged, it's after the plug-in, like after the saturation module, just as you see it here, right? You saturate up here. This dry and wet is only for the saturation, right? When you put it in dry and you don't have the insert button activated, the preamp is still in play. So let me demonstrate that, right? And I'm going to do it kind of extreme here. So right now, this is what we sound like with the preamp and the saturation and everything set at wet, and we're on classic mode.
She walked right out
and I'm driving it hard. Go to dry. The saturation is now out of the picture. And to show you that the lower section is still in play, we'll activate the filter, right? So they're independent of each other, right? And that's in the classic mode. That's what you would expect for that saturation to work, right? Now, there's several steps to this. The first is that the insert can be put into the saturation chain before the dry and wet mix knob. So if we do that, all of a sudden now, the filter has a different effect. All right, it's now before the saturation, but because we're in dry, right, you won't hear it until you get to wet, if that makes sense, right? So this is essentially a routing button. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you change the mix type to, let's say, digital, right, and we'll just use the 1X for demonstration. Now what happens is when you go to anything besides 100%, what's being affected is now being modified. So you're either going to distort the peaks, these three options, or you'll have clean peaks with these three options. That's my understanding from reading the manual. So let's put this at halfway. So that's at 50%. So now let's see what happens.
She walked right out my life, cut me down with a bloody knife, ran away with my soul, played me like
All right.
a tune on the radio.
So it's either the peaks are distorted or they're clean. So that's the digital one. If we go to the soft one, it should be a little easier. Right? So it sounds like it's letting especially the peaks that have the most information being modified by the plugin, those are coming through clean. And I believe the way to use this is if you wanted to kind of maintain some of the original signal, in other words, parallel saturation, this gives you the ability to allow you to choose whether or not the peaks are distorted or clean. That's kind of roughly my understanding. So let's look at distorted soft. As you can see, it's just the opposite now, right? So now the peaks are distorting, but anything after the transients basically aren't really being touched as much, right? So that's what that drop-down menu is for. We've looked at the controls. We did it before, we did it after. We looked at some of the advanced features in here. There are a number of presets that we can look at. Now, one of the ones that gentleman Carl Fath, he provided this preset is called the male voice anti-nasalizer. Now, this record had some nasaliness to it because that was sort of the way that I recorded it, like with this grunge on my voice. Well, just take a listen. This is before.
She walked right out my life.
After.
She walked right out my life.
Smoothing that thing right on out. And he's using that tech that we just talked about with the mix type. So right now he has the dry and wet mix knob at 30, right? But because of the nature of the mix type, he's blending it. It did the trick, man. Of course, there's some EQ on there as well that's boosted up to 8 decibels on the high shelf, and on the low shelf down here at 154. That does smoothen some things out there, kind of gives it a smiley effect, right? Once I put this on, it was like, that's it. That's my review of Jam from Acustica Audio. If you're interested in getting it, check the link for the description. Outside of that,